Wait a moment, beloved brothers and sisters. I have something urgent to share with you. This is a timely experience, and there is no time left. That is why, the moment we received this message, we did not hesitate or think twice to share it. Please do not scroll past. This is a message you need in order to prepare for what is coming. Tell us where you are watching from, so that our prayer team can stand with you and pray for you tonight. I will now begin sharing today's experience. My name is James Sterling. I am a sergeant in the United States Marine Corps. 37 years I have lived, 37 years of military service, of discipline, of believing that everything in life had a logical explanation. And then came the 8 days that broke all of that open. I was on military leave in North Carolina when it started, a simple illness on the 3rd day that I thought I could push through. By day 8, on the night of October 31st, my heart stopped. I was dead for 5 minutes, clinically dead. My brain flatlined, my heart ceased to beat. And in those 5 minutes I encountered Jesus Christ and saw things that will change everything. What he showed me concerns what is to come. This is a direct message from the risen Jesus, delivered through me, a Marine who did not believe in such things, who had to die first before he would listen. I am sharing this because I was sent back to warn you. But before I tell you what he showed me, you need to understand what it cost me to be in that room with him. It started as something small, a heaviness in the chest, a tiredness that would not go away no matter how many hours I slept. I was at my sister Sandra's house in North Carolina when it began. I told myself it was nothing. Soldiers do not complain about small pains, we push through. That is what the military carves into you from the day you step off the bus at basic training. That is what becomes part of your skeleton. I pushed through. I helped Sandra with things around the house. I played with my nephews, even though my energy was lower than it had any right to be. But I could feel it, something changing inside me. Each day a little darker than the last. By day 5, I could barely get out of bed. By day 6, the room would spin when I tried to stand. I could not eat. My cheekbones were becoming more prominent in the mirror. My eyes looked sunken in a way that frightened me, though I would not say that to anyone. The afternoon passed like a dream I was too tired to finish. Night came again. I remember the moment clearly, even though it lasted only seconds. My chest became very tight, tighter than it had ever been, a fist squeezing my heart. I tried to breathe and my lungs were fused. I tried to call out and no sound came from my throat. The machines started beeping faster. The alarms were ringing. People moved quickly around me. Sandra was crying. She was holding my hand and crying and telling me to hold on. But I could not hold on. It was like something was letting go of me. Like I was a boat that had been trying to stay anchored in a storm, and the anchor was finally breaking free. Everything became quieter, even though the machines were loud. Everything became darker, even though there were lights in the room. I felt my heart do something wrong. A rhythm that was not a rhythm. A beating that had lost its certainty. And then I felt it stop. I remember that moment. I remember the feeling of my body going completely still. I remember the silence that came from inside me. Even as the world outside continued its noise, I remember the sense of release. Like a weight I had been carrying my entire life was suddenly lifted from my chest and I could finally breathe. Though I was no longer breathing at all, the beeping grew louder. The voices grew more urgent. I could hear Sandra screaming from what seemed like a very great distance. But all of that was happening somewhere I had already left. The transition happened in an instant, but it was not frightening. It was not painful. It was like stepping through a doorway from one room into another. Except that the room I stepped into had no ceiling, no walls, no edges I could perceive. One moment, I was in the hospital bed feeling my body betray me. The next moment, I was somewhere else entirely. I was standing, and I was breathing, and I was alive in a way I had never felt alive before in 37 years on Earth. My chest did not hurt. The weakness was completely gone. The heaviness that had pressed down on me for 8 days had vanished as though it had never existed. I looked down at my hands and they were luminous, not glowing in the way a flashlight glows, but translucent in the way a flame glows, lit from within by something that was not fire. They still looked like my hands, the same knuckles, the same old scar on my right thumb from a training accident 11 years ago. I was still myself, just clearer, more real, somehow, than I had ever been. The place I was standing in was not like anything that exists on Earth, and I am aware of how that sounds from someone who has spent his life demanding proof for everything. The ground beneath my feet was smooth and bright, like something between polished stone and solid light. When I looked down at it, I could see depth in it, layers descending into what should have been darkness but was instead something full of presence. A darkness that was alive, a darkness that contained more than I could see. The air had no specific smell, but it had a quality, a purity, a cleanness that felt like what I imagined peace would feel like if peace had a temperature and a texture. It was warm without being hot, bright without being harsh. It was everything the hospital room was not. It was the opposite of illness. It was the opposite of dying. There were others around me. I could not see them individually or count them, but I was aware of them the way you are, sometimes aware of a crowd, even when your eyes are closed. Thousands of them, perhaps more. Their faces were turned toward something in the distance, something I could not yet perceive. There was a readiness to them, a waiting that did not feel like impatience but like the moment before a conductor raises the baton, like something was about to begin. I wanted to speak and could not find my voice. I was not sure how sound worked in this place, whether it worked the same way at all. That was when I felt something change in the air, a presence approaching. Not footsteps, there was no sound that I could name, but a shift, a change in the quality of everything around me, like the atmosphere itself became aware that something was coming. And then I saw him. Jesus Christ walked toward me. He was not alone. There were beings of light moving with him, alongside him, and I understood without being told that these were angels. They moved with a weight and a power that made me feel very small, not insignificant. The smallness was not humiliating. It was the smallness of standing at the edge of the ocean. You understand your size against something vast, but the ocean is not threatening you. It simply is what it is, and its size is part of what makes it magnificent. When he looked at me, I experienced something that I do not have words for, and I say that as a man who has never in his life claimed that something was beyond his ability to describe. He saw everything, not in the way a judge examines a defendant, not in the way a doctor reads a chart. He saw everything the way you see a person you have loved since before they knew they existed. He saw every moment of my life, every choice, every success and every failure, every moment of courage and every moment I had been afraid and pretended not to be, every secret thing, every sin I had buried, every good I had done when no one was watching. He saw all of it. And his face held no judgment. None. Not even the mild disappointment of someone who expected better. What his face held was love, but love is too small a word for what I saw. It was love without conditions, love without a ledger, love that looked at everything broken inside me, and did not flinch, did not turn away, did not calculate the cost. It simply remained. It simply was. His presence was peaceful and strong at the same time, and I do not know how those two things were present simultaneously. But they were. He had a beard. His hair was long. His clothes were simple. But those details did not matter because what I was perceiving was not primarily his physical form. It was his nature, his essence, something that the physical form only partially expressed. He turned toward the great crowd of waiting souls and made a gesture, small, gentle, unhurried. His hand moved slightly, and what that gesture communicated without words, without sound, was a promise: I am coming back. I will be with you soon. Wait for me. The weight of that gesture broke something open inside me. I could feel the love in it, the certainty. This was not a wish or a hope. This was a declaration from someone for whom time itself was a thing he had made. Then he turned back to me, and everything else faded. The crowd, the vastness of that place, the attending angels, all of it became background. It was just him and me, and the intensity of his presence was like standing in front of the sun, except the sun was not burning me. like hearing a sound that should have destroyed my hearing, but instead clarified everything. Every atom of my being was responding to him. He showed me things, not with words, not with sentences that come one after another, the way we speak to each other. It was more like he opened something and let me see directly. Knowledge without the process of learning, understanding without the scaffolding of explanation, like information transferred from one consciousness to another without passing through language. What he showed me was specific. He made sure I understood the time frame. These things would begin to happen in March, building through April, and by the end of April, the world would see plainly what was real and what was not. He was showing me what was coming, and he was showing it to me because he wanted me to go back and say it. The first thing he showed me came like a dream I was living inside. I was standing in it, not watching it from outside. I saw billions of phones lighting up simultaneously, not in sequence, all at once, like a field of fireflies suddenly becoming a single blinding light. Every continent, every time zone, every language, messages spreading from person to person with a speed that no physical thing could match. People were reading things on their screens, and I could feel what they felt as they read, a panic rising in the chest like floodwater, hearts beginning to race, hands shaking as they typed responses, minds immediately jumping past the question of whether something was true, straight to the assumption that it was and the terror of what that meant. But the panic was not coming from something real. It was coming from the idea of something, from the belief in something that had not actually happened the way it was being described. It was like a virus of fear, a disease of the mind that spread faster than any biological contagion could ever spread, because the human mind, once frightened, becomes the most efficient distributor of fear that has ever existed. A frightened person tells 10 people. Those 10 people tell 100. The 100 become 1,000 before the original message has even been verified. The messages were about infection, about being already affected, already compromised, already lost before you could even begin to protect yourself, about having something inside you that was damaging you without your knowledge or consent. The cruelty of it was precise. The fear was designed to make people feel that fighting back was pointless because the damage was already done. And people believed it, not because they were foolish, because fear has a way of bypassing logic. Fear does not wait for evidence. Fear does not say, "Let me examine this carefully before I respond." Fear says, the cost of not believing this and being wrong is higher than the cost of believing it and being wrong. And so people passed the messages along. They amplified the signal. They became, without knowing it, soldiers in an army fighting for the very thing that was trying to destroy them. This was not an accident. It was a strategy, a deliberate attack on the mind and the spirit of believers, designed to weaken them from the inside, to make them doubt themselves, to make them lose hope before any actual battle had been fought. The enemy does not always come through the front door. Sometimes it sends a message through your phone and waits for you to open it. He showed me this, and then he showed me the answer. And the answer was not a counter message or a better set of facts. The answer was identity, knowing whose you are. Believers who were standing on a solid foundation, not a foundation of information, not a foundation of spiritual confidence in their own righteousness, but a foundation of relationship with Jesus, would feel the fear and would not be moved by it. They would read the messages, and their spirits would say, "This is not from God." They would have a discernment that was not intellectual. It would be the discernment of someone who knows the voice of the shepherd and can recognize a voice that is not his. When this happens, and he made clear that it would happen, believers need to resist the urge to either dismiss what they are being told or to be consumed by it. They need to stop. They need to breathe. They need to ask themselves, does this come from love or from fear? Because everything that comes from God will ultimately lead you toward peace, and everything that comes from the enemy will ultimately lead you toward panic. Those two destinations are not hard to tell apart, if you are willing to sit still long enough to feel where you are heading. The second thing he showed me was darker than the first and more personal, more intimate in the way that shame is intimate. I was shown people alone, not together, alone, in bedrooms, in living rooms, in offices late at night when everyone else had gone home. They were scrolling through their devices, looking at content they knew they should not be looking at. The images, the videos, The content that promises pleasure and delivers something that feels like pleasure for a moment and then leaves behind an emptiness that grows larger each time you try to fill it. He was showing me pornography, not as a subject for a sermon, as a doorway. He was showing me that what most people understood as a moral failure, or as a habit, or as a private weakness, was functioning as something much more strategically significant. It was an opening, not a metaphorical opening. An actual point of entry for something that had been waiting for exactly that invitation, behind the screens. And I saw this. I perceived it the way you perceive the temperature of a room when you walk into it. There were shadows. They were not forcing their way through phones or through computers. They were not breaking down doors. They were waiting, patient in the way that only something with no sense of time can be patient. They were waiting to be invited, and the invitation came through choice. Through a person choosing to look at something they knew was wrong, and then choosing to look again, and then choosing to look a third time until the choice no longer felt like a choice but like a compulsion. Once the door opened, even fractionally, they had an entry point. And what they wanted was not to destroy people immediately. That would be too visible. They wanted influence. They wanted the slow accumulation of control. They wanted to make people weaker incrementally, so gradually that the person experiencing it could not identify a single moment when everything changed. They wanted shame, because shame is one of the most effective tools of isolation ever devised, and isolation is one of the most effective tools of destruction. A person who is ashamed tells no one. A person who tells no one gets no help. A person who gets no help remains exactly where the darkness wants them. He showed me that this would intensify in March and April. The temptation would become stronger, more sophisticated, more cleverly disguised. It would present itself as freedom, as relaxation, as harmless. It would arrive at moments of stress and loneliness and exhaustion, when a person's resistance was lowest and their need for comfort was highest, and it would target believers specifically, people who were trying to remain faithful but who had not yet learned to recognize how early the battle begins, how early you need to turn away. For some people, if the pattern continued unaddressed, it would lead somewhere darker, not because God had abandoned them, but because they had opened a door and not closed it, and something had moved in while they weren't paying attention, and it was now affecting their decisions, their marriages, their children, their ability to pray, their capacity for joy. It was blocking the signal, the way interference blocks a radio frequency. The frequency was still broadcasting. They just couldn't hear it anymore. But he also showed me the other side of this. He showed me that no door that has been opened cannot be shut again. That the shame people carried about this was not from God. God's conviction leads toward freedom, not toward hiding. He showed me people who had reached out to others, who had spoken the unspeakable thing out loud to a trusted person, and how the act of speaking it had immediately begun to diminish its power. The darkness depends on silence. The light depends on honesty. And he had made honesty accessible to everyone, no matter how long they had been carrying something alone. The third thing he made me aware of had a scale that was difficult to hold in my mind. It was vast in a way that the first two visions were not. I saw the devices, every phone, every camera, every microphone, every smart screen, every connected appliance in every home in every country. All of it lit up before me in the vision like a kind of map. An enormous, intricate web of connection that covered the entire surface of the world, the way a net covers the surface of water. Every node pulsing softly, every node active, every node recording. I had known, as anyone who pays attention knows, that these devices collected information, that the data was used by companies, that there were systems analyzing preferences and predicting behavior. None of that was news. But what he was showing me was something operating beneath that layer, something that was using the infrastructure that already existed, that most people had already consented to, for a purpose that those people had not consented to and would not have consented to if they had understood it. The data being collected was not just being used to sell products. It was being used to build profiles, not commercial profiles, but spiritual ones. Profiles of what made a person doubt, what made a person afraid, what made a person susceptible to a particular kind of deception, what made a person likely to abandon a conviction when the pressure became high enough, the patterns of a person's life, when they were strong and when they were weak, when their faith was active and when it was dormant, when they were connected to their community and when they were isolated, all of it being recorded and analyzed and fed into something that would use it. This was being used against believers. And he showed me something that I did not expect. It was being used with particular focus against older believers, against those who had spent decades in faith, who had seen things and survived things and built a kind of spiritual depth that the darkness genuinely feared. These were the ones being watched most carefully. Because what they carried, wisdom, perseverance, a long and tested faith, was not something that could be faked or manufactured. It had to be either stolen or destroyed. And the way to steal it or destroy it was to isolate the person who carried it from every source of strength and community that sustained it. He showed me that the goal was division, not dramatic, visible division, not wars or public conflicts, subtle division, the kind that happens when an algorithm decides what content a person sees, until that person's view of the world becomes warped without their noticing. The kind that happens when a platform decides which voices to amplify and which voices to bury, until a community of believers begins to distrust each other because the information they are each receiving has been shaped to produce distrust. The answer he gave me was not a technology solution. It was not encryption or privacy settings or going off the grid. The answer was real relationship, physical presence, the kind of community that algorithms cannot fully infiltrate because it is not mediated by screens. He was telling believers to invest in the people who were physically near them, to know their neighbors, to gather in physical spaces, to build trust through shared presence rather than shared posts. The darkness was very good at manipulating digital community. It was much less effective against two people who had looked each other in the eyes. The fourth thing he revealed was about a kind of patience I had not understood before, a patience that was predatory. I was shown shadows moving toward specific people, not sweeping broadly across a crowd, not attacking everyone at once. That would cause people to unite, to recognize a common enemy, to stand together. Instead, the movement was precise and selective, targeted. The shadows would identify a person, someone with a family, with a reputation, with a life built over years on the foundation of faith and values. And they would begin to study that person from a distance, watching, learning. They would learn the person's routine, the time they were most tired, the day of the week when their faith felt most thin, the relationship that caused the most anxiety, the fear that lived deepest below the surface, the hope that felt most fragile. All of it cataloged, all of it becoming intelligence that would be used at the exact moment of greatest vulnerability. I watched this in the vision, and it disturbed me more than the first two visions had, because it was so methodical. There was nothing frantic about it. There was no impatience. There was the calm efficiency of something that had done this before, that understood human nature with terrible precision, that knew that a person under enough pressure at the right moment in the right circumstances would make a choice they would never make under normal conditions. The attacks that would come in March and April would not look supernatural. They would look like bad luck, like coincidence, like life simply going wrong in the way that life sometimes does. A financial crisis at a vulnerable moment, a relationship conflict that arrived exactly when a person's defenses were lowest, a health scare, a professional humiliation, something that would make a person question whether following Jesus was worth the cost, whether the promise of protection was real, whether God was actually paying attention, whether they had been deceived all along by their own desire to believe in something. But he also showed me something that filled me with a different emotion entirely. He showed me the believers who were prepared, who had built their lives on something real, not on the feeling of faith, but on the substance of it, on years of prayer, of studying Scripture, of choosing to trust God in circumstances that did not make trusting easy. These were the ones who, when the attack came, would feel the impact but would not be knocked down. They would recognize the strategy for what it was. They would be shaken and would not be destroyed. They would stand on the foundation they had spent years building, and the foundation would hold. These things carefully they had researched. They had invested money and time. They were not naive. They believed, reasonably, that they had done what responsible people do to protect themselves. But some of the shields had cracks, not large cracks, not failures that anyone would easily spot, hairline fractures in places that would not be tested under ordinary conditions, but that would open up under the specific kind of pressure that was coming. The shields were not as solid as they appeared, and the enemy, who had helped engineer some of those cracks, knew exactly where they were. More importantly, and this was the part that made the vision truly disturbing, I could see that some of the people standing behind their shields were so focused on the shield itself that they had stopped looking around it. They were watching the shield. They were monitoring the shield's performance. They were updating the shield and maintaining the shield and trusting the shield. And while they were doing all of that, there were things happening in their peripheral vision that they were completely missing. The shield had become the entire field of their attention, and the field of their attention had become a prison. The darkest part of this strategy was its elegance. The enemy had convinced people to replace the one thing that actually protected them, which was spiritual discernment, the ability to sense what was true and what was false, to feel the Holy Spirit's unease before the intellect could catch up to it, with something that felt more reliable because it was measurable. You can update software. You can verify that an encryption is active. You can feel the weight of a lock in your hand. These things give certainty in a way that spiritual awareness does not always give, because spiritual awareness asks you to trust something invisible. And so the trap was this: by giving people something visible to trust, the darkness had undermined their trust in what was invisible. By providing a solution that felt complete, it had made the complete solution feel unnecessary. People who had once relied on prayer and discernment were now relying on systems, and the systems, when they failed, would leave those people with nothing, because they had allowed their spiritual muscles to atrophy in the confidence that the machine would compensate. In March and April, he showed me, some of these systems would fail, not all of them, and not everywhere at once, but enough for people to experience the ground moving under them, enough for them to realize that what they had been trusting was not as solid as they believed. And this would be terrifying for those who had placed all their security in the visible. But for those who had never abandoned the invisible, who had continued to pray, continued to seek discernment, continued to maintain their relationship with God even as they also used the tools available to them, the failure of the systems would be a temporary inconvenience, not an existential crisis. The sixth and final thing he showed me made my spirit tremble in a way that none of the others had, and not because it was the most terrifying. It made me tremble because of what was underneath it, because of what he revealed was happening on the other side of it. I was shown a moment of collapse, not a gradual decline, a sudden sharp disruption. Screens flashing with error messages, digital systems failing without warning, bank accounts becoming inaccessible, networks going dark, platforms that billions of people had come to depend on as naturally as they depended on running water, suddenly becoming unreliable or completely non-functional. The infrastructure of modern life, the invisible scaffolding that holds everything up without most people ever thinking about it, beginning to buckle. I watched panic spread across the world the way a wave spreads across water. People discovering that their money might not be safe. People losing access to information they needed. People cut off from the communication systems they used to reach family, to coordinate work, to understand what was happening in the world. The terror was not just about the practical inconveniences, enormous as those would be. The terror was existential. It was the terror of discovering that the systems you had built your life upon were not, in fact, as permanent as they felt. I want to be careful about what I say here, because it would be easy to make this vision sound like a fantasy, like science fiction, like something that only matters in theory. It is not theoretical. The disruption I was shown had a specific quality to it, a suddenness that was designed to remove the possibility of gradual adjustment. A gradual decline allows people to adapt. People are remarkably good at adapting to slow change and normalizing what is deteriorating so that each new level of bad feels like the new normal. But sudden disruption does not allow that. Sudden disruption forces a response, and the response a person has in a moment of crisis reveals what they actually believe rather than what they say they believe. I watched people in the vision say things with their mouths in ordinary times that their actions directly contradicted in the moment of crisis. People who said they trusted God and who, when the system failed, responded with exactly the same panic as people who had never made that claim. Not because they were hypocrites, because the trust had not been tested enough to become real. It had been a position, not a practice. And I understood something as I watched this. I understood that this was not simply a crisis, it was a test. It was a moment designed either by the enemy's strategy or by God's permission, or both, which are not always separate things, to reveal what people were actually standing on. Collapse does not destroy a foundation. It reveals whether a foundation was ever real. He showed me the faces of believers in that moment of shaking. Not all of them responded the same way. Some of them were terrified in exactly the same way the people without faith were terrified, because the shaking had revealed that their faith had been a layer of confidence resting on top of the same worldly foundations that everyone else was standing on. The faith had felt real, but when the systems beneath it failed, the faith failed with them, because it had been resting on the systems without knowing it. But others, and this was the part that made my spirit tremble with something I can only call awe. Others were different. I watched them experience the same circumstances and respond with a steadiness that was completely out of proportion to what they were experiencing, not because they were not afraid. Some of them were visibly afraid. But beneath the fear, there was something that did not move, something that had not been shaken because it was not connected to the things that were shaking. Their identity was not in their bank account. Their hope was not in a platform. Their security was not in a system. Their security was in a person who was the same yesterday and today and forever, and that person was not subject to server outages. The shaking was a tool the darkness intended for destruction, but he showed me that in the hands of God, it would function as something else entirely. It would function as clarification, as an opportunity for people to discover, finally, what they were actually made of and what they were actually standing on. Some of what they discovered would be painful. Some of it would be the beginning of something new. He showed me all of these things, and then he was silent for a moment that lasted no measurable amount of time. The visions had stopped. The space around us was simply itself again, vast and luminous and full of that presence I cannot name. I understood, without being told, that I was about to be sent back. I understood this in the way you understand things in that place. Not through reasoning, but through a knowing that landed in your spirit before your mind could form a question about it. And I did not want to go. I want to be honest about that. I did not want to return to pain, to a body that had spent 8 days trying to die, to a world where everything was smaller and heavier and harder than what I was standing in. I had been a sergeant for a long time. I had given orders and received orders, and I understood the distinction between a request and a directive. What I felt in that moment was a directive, gentle in its delivery, absolute in its nature. There was no anger in it. There was only certainty, the certainty of something that had already been decided, that I was being included in rather than commanded by, as though I was being told the plan and trusted to carry it out, rather than simply forced into compliance. That distinction mattered to me. It still does. He saw that in me. He sees everything. And he saw that, and his face did not judge me for it. What he showed me then was not an argument or an explanation. It was simply his presence, one more time, settling something inside me. Like a hand placed on a shoulder that is shaking. Like a voice that says, without words, I know what I am asking of you. I know the cost. Go. There was something else he gave me before the return. Something I struggle to describe because it was not an object and it was not information. It was more like he placed something inside me. Something that has not left me since, even through the pain of recovery, even through the months of learning to process what happened. It was a sense of his presence, not as a feeling that comes and goes, but as a permanent feature of my inner landscape. A knowing that wherever I am, whatever is happening, if I turn inward, he is there. I have been a Marine for a long time. I have been in situations where I was very afraid. I have learned the difference between courage that comes from adrenaline and training, and courage that comes from something deeper. What he placed in me that day was the second kind, the kind that does not require the right conditions, the kind that is there when everything else has failed. The light became brighter. Pure white, overwhelming, brilliant, not the white of a hospital ceiling, but the white of something that has never known darkness. And then, without any sensation of movement, there was darkness instead, and the sound of machines beeping, and alarms ringing, and urgent voices, and the feeling of air being pulled into lungs that had not been working moments before. My eyes opened. A doctor was standing over me. His face was shocked in the specific way that faces are shocked when something has happened that the person did not believe was possible. My sister was crying, not the quiet tears of someone watching a decline, but the shaking, relieved, disbelieving tears of someone who has just seen something reversed. I could hear voices saying, "His heart is beating and he is back," and other things I cannot remember because my mind was still half somewhere else. The pain returned immediately. The heaviness in my chest came back like a wave. The difficulty breathing, the weakness in my limbs, the soreness in my joints, all of it returned. My body remembered exactly where it had been when I left it. None of that had been healed by the experience. I would spend weeks recovering. I would have to learn, with the help of the medical team and my sister, how to be in a physical body that had very nearly stopped being viable. But beneath all of that pain was something else, something that the pain could not reach. A knowledge, a certainty, a presence. I had been clinically dead for 5 minutes. My brain had flatlined. My heart had stopped. 5 minutes is not a gray area in medicine. 5 minutes without cardiac activity is not a near miss. It is death. And yet I had returned, and I had not returned empty. I had returned carrying something. The knowledge burns in me now, the way a fire burns when you cannot put it out, not because it is destroying you, but because it is real, and it is alive, and it will not be extinguished. I do not share this lightly. I am not a man who speaks about visions. I am not a man who has ever in 37 years claimed to have heard from God. I am a sergeant in the United States Marine Corps, and I believe in what I can see and touch and measure. I saw what I saw. I carry what I carry, and I was sent back to say it. March came. April is following, and everything he showed me applies to right now, to what is happening in your life and in the lives of the people you love. The 6 things he showed me are not predictions meant to frighten you. They are warnings given in love, which means they are given so that you do not have to be caught off guard. A warning is useless if it arrives after the event. It is given before, while there is still time to prepare, not to prevent what is coming, because some of what is coming is part of a larger story that is not ours to stop, but to prepare your heart and your mind so that when it arrives, you know what it is and you know how to stand. About the first vision. When the fear messages come, and they will come through your phone and through people you trust and through media you have depended on, do not respond immediately. Let the first wave of fear pass before you do anything. Fear demands immediacy. Fear says, act now, there is no time to think. God almost never says that. God says, be still and know. Fear and wisdom cannot both drive at the same time. Choose who is behind the wheel. Practice this before you need it. The moment of fear is not when you develop the habit of pausing. The habit has to already be there. In the ordinary moments of your daily life, when small things cause small anxieties, practice stillness. Practice the pause. Practice asking yourself, what is this actually requiring me to do right now? More often than you expect, the answer will be nothing. More often than you expect, the urgency will be manufactured. And as you get better at identifying manufactured urgency in small situations, you will be able to identify it in large ones. About the second vision. If you are carrying something in secret, now is the time to bring it into the light. Not because you deserve punishment for it, but because secrecy is the soil in which this particular kind of darkness grows best. Light destroys it, not the light of public exposure. The light of honest confession to one trusted person, to a community that will hold you without condemning you. That community exists. It may not be where you currently are, but it exists, and the discomfort of finding it is far smaller than the cost of not finding it. About the third vision. Tend your real relationships, the ones that happen in person, the ones that require effort and time and physical presence. Digital community has value, but it is vulnerable to manipulation in ways that physical community is not. Know your people. Let your people know you. This is not a small thing. This is one of the most important forms of protection available to you. I say this as a man who spent much of his adult life in institutions that understood this instinctively. The military does not build unit cohesion through messaging apps. It builds it through shared meals and shared hardship and shared space. There is something that passes between people who have been physically present with each other that cannot be replicated through a screen. The enemy knows this. The systems designed to divide believers are built on the assumption that digital relationship can fully replace physical relationship. That assumption is wrong, and those who act on it will be more isolated than they know. About the fourth vision, build depth now before the pressure comes, not because you know exactly what is coming for you specifically, but because depth takes time and pressure does not give you time. A root system grows in seasons of rain. A person who waits until the drought to develop a root system will not have one when they need it. Pray now, study now. Build your relationship with God in the ordinary days so that it is strong in the extraordinary ones. About the fifth vision, use the tools available to you and do not trust only the tools. Use technology wisely and maintain your spiritual discernment actively. These two things are not in conflict unless you let them be. The problem comes when the tools become a substitute for wisdom rather than a support for it. Ask yourself regularly, am I still seeking the Holy Spirit's guidance in the decisions of my life, or have I outsourced that to a system? The system will fail. The Spirit will not. About the sixth vision, when the shaking comes, let it do what it is designed to do, not what the darkness designed it for, which is panic and abandonment, what God can do with it, which is clarification. Let it reveal what is real. Let it show you what you have been standing on. If some of what it reveals is disappointing, if the shaking shows you that some of your security was misplaced, receive that information as a gift rather than a condemnation. Now you know. Now you can build differently. And above all of this, above every specific instruction, there is one thing that encompasses all of it. Know Jesus. Not know about Jesus. Not have opinions about Jesus. Know him. Speak to him in the ordinary moments of your life. Be honest with him. He already knows everything, so honesty costs you nothing and gives you everything. He is not waiting for you to have your act together before he makes himself available to you. He is available right now, in whatever state you are in whatever mess your life currently is. I know this because I was dead. I was clinically dead, a man who had spent his life demanding proof, and he showed up anyway. He showed up without asking me whether I deserved it. He showed up without checking my record first. He showed up the way he shows up, completely, without reservation, with a love that had no conditions attached to it. That love is available to every person reading this. It was not reserved for the 5 minutes when I had no heartbeat. It is available in the full, breathing, complicated, difficult minutes of ordinary life. It is available right now. March is passing. April is here. And what is happening in these months is real, but God is more real. What is coming is powerful, but God is more powerful. What is coming will be used to frighten and control and isolate, but those who belong to Jesus carry something that cannot be manipulated by an algorithm or shaken by a system failure or destroyed by a lie. They carry his presence, and that, I can tell you from the only authority I have. The authority of someone who has stood in that presence and returned is enough. It is more than enough. It is everything. I am a sergeant in the United States Marine Corps. I do not say things I do not mean. I was dead for 5 minutes. And I came back because there was something worth coming back to say. This is it. These are the words. Hear them.